On this edition of the program, we have an all-star cast for our UK election special. Manveen Rana, Sam Avery, Tom Merritt, Will Harris. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome, everybody, to the Politics program. And we have a special treat for you today. Here in America, we do big democracy. Loud democracy, long campaigns, slings and arrows, the likes of which we have rarely seen like we are experiencing right now after Joe Biden's debate performance. But there are other ways to do democracy. Indeed, our cousins across the pond have an election this week on July 4th, no less. And so if they were going to honor us by holding their election on our nation's Independence Day, no hard feelings, by the way, guys, then I thought I would give something back. A podcast. So you're welcome from America to you, the UK. It's a fascinating discussion. It really is an interesting election. It is a change election. But let's go ahead and get things started. This is Tom Merritt of Daily Tech News Show. What's going on?
You know, I love the audacity. That's the first thing I'll say. The audacity of not only calling an election before you have to, when you know you're going to lose. I think everyone will agree that Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives retaining the majority would be a huge upset. But then setting the election for July 4th. You know, Independence Day, just to rub it in the nose of the Americans.
Why are they so obsessed with us, Tom?
I don't know.
Why are they so obsessed with us?
Please stop.
It's just embarrassing to you. It's embarrassing to you. That
it was more than 200 years ago now, y'all.
Oh my God. I thought we'd all moved on, but apparently we haven't. Well, so obviously this was a snap election, and I'm sure we're going to get into this a little bit later as this special progresses, which we recorded while this campaign goes on. But if we are to, on some level, this is closer to when the announcement was made than the election day. The Rishi Sunak strategy on this, I guess, is to say that things are getting better enough now that you can stem the tide. How much do you buy the conspiracy theory that this is more about when school starts in California, where he wants to move, than it has about any kind of chance for the Conservatives to retain a majority?
Yeah, normally I wouldn't put too much credence into that, but the Conservative Party has been such a wreck for so long. And we've talked on the show about, changing prime ministers without having elections, because the Conservative Party itself just loses confidence in the prime ministers. They've had, I think, 23 prime ministers this term, perhaps something that might be a bit more.
A bit high. But can you name all of them? Can you name all of them in the 14? I think it's 14 years that the Conservatives have been in power.
Well, it's going backwards. It's Liz Truss, Boris Johnson.
So Sunak, Truss,
Truss, Johnson. Why am I blanking on Theresa May?
David
Cameron. Yeah.
So 5.
I think that's
5.
Right. Am I missing anyone?
And they won. There was an election with Boris, right?
Boris got elected.
Boris won.
Yeah, Boris took over for Theresa May, who took over for David Cameron, and had an election that he won. Then he had to leave.
Yes, because he was championing Remain with the Brexit vote.
And that was actually a really good election for him, because they were technically in coalition with the Irish DUP, which caused a lot of complications on some of the post-Brexit stuff. And then when he called the election, they did, the Northern Wall happened, and they swept to a full majority. Getting back to Rishi Sunak, who he had to call an election by November, right? So it wasn't like he called it super early. Some
might argue that those 2 months would have been 2 months that inflation continues to go down, and you might be able to sell a little bit more of an argument that, hey, look, I know this hasn't looked pretty, but if you want a steady hand at the wheel, this wheel looks pretty steady.
I've heard people say the opposite of that, which I also find hilarious. And it just shows that nobody can agree where the economy really is going. But some people are like, he was afraid that the economic reports would look worse by November. And because it's better now, you better, strike while the iron is hot.
Yeah.
I really don't know why he called it in reality. But I tend to think that it could have as much to do as when school starts in California as anything else. And it was probably a timing thing of let's make Keir Starmer and Labor deal with what's coming, because we feel like it would be less advantageous for them to be in government later this year than us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not sure why. I don't know what they think is coming. Maybe it's, everything does point to inflation continuing to stabilize. Everything does point to possibly the war in Israel wrapping up. Everything does point to Ukraine getting worse for the UK.
Which is, I don't know, the war in Europe.
Yeah. And so maybe they don't want to deal with that. I don't know. But here we are, and God love them. I know it's bad for your business, but how efficient is it to call an election and have it before the U.S. even gets to their conventions?
Okay, so the election is called, Prime Minister's on the stump, and he's got a lot to answer for. Well, thus far he hasn't done a great job. It didn't start fantastic. This is how he decided to call for the election.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
Good Lord. Here's Liverpool comedian Sam Avery's description.
So this date, it was called very quickly. It was called very dramatically. It was called in a way that was indicative of the way that the Tory party has been running the country for the last 14 years, because it was called on the steps of 10 Downing Street in the pouring rain.
In the rain. Someone left the cake out in the rain.
It was unbelievably, I mean, the word optics gets overused, but just in terms of a visual of the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, calling an election as the British weather just decimates his face. It was really, really just... And also in the background, there was... Because word had got out that he was going to call this election, there was some Labour Party activists playing... It's a song called Things Can Only Get Better, which was the theme when Labour won the 1997 election. That was blasting over the back of his speech. So there was this... It was just terrible PR, really. It looked really poor.
And it's like, wait a minute. All right. So here's my thing from watching it from afar, is that he goes out and it's raining. So number one, you don't have to go out. You can just say it's delayed 2 hours, or it's delayed till tomorrow. Like, you could just wait until it stops raining at some point. But if you're insistent that you definitely got to go out in the rain, where it's like, oh, look, I'm trying to beat traffic here, dog. Like, I got to get out here immediately. At least somebody come up with a line that involves the rain. At least somebody come up with, like, it's pouring now, but we're gonna get through it just like we always have. No, nothing. He just walked out in the rain, cut his promo, and walked off.
Acted like it wasn't raining, which is something only really. This might not land with the US audience, but cricketers always, when it's raining and your team's in the ascendancy, obviously you can't play cricket in the rain. So the bowling team, if they need a couple of wickets, act like it's not raining, even though it's pouring down.
Gotcha.
That's kind of what he was doing. But he could have just done the announcement first thing in the morning when word hadn't got out and just got it over with. Instead, he waited, and everyone got the ducks in a row. And even the British weather went, "I've had enough of you. I'm gonna turn it up."
Oh, come on, Sam. It couldn't have been that bad. Let's talk to a woman who was out there in the rain, outside of number 10 Downing Street for the Prime Minister's announcement, and has been all over the UK covering it since, for her podcast, The Story, which is a product of The Times and the Sunday Times of London. This is Manveen Rana.
Well, to be perfectly honest, after that first day when the election was announced out of the blue in a way that nobody was expecting, and in just the biggest torrential downpour in the way that only London can do. After that one day of insane excitement, I have to say it's been the dullest election I think I can remember. I think
Really?
it's going to be the dullest election because everybody knows how it ends, with the most exciting election night, because we are going to watch the entire electoral map move. It's going to be a moment. It's historic. If the polls are to be believed at the moment, we are looking at a historic swing in the way that we've never really seen in this country, from a solid government on one side to a massive swing to the other. In the first past the post system, that's almost unheard of. It doesn't happen very often. So it's going to be an amazing election night. In the meantime, it's been a bit of a damp squib of an election, and that's partly because we have two of the most uninspiring leaders of both the Conservative Party and Labour. It's very hard to get excited by either. There is no sense of momentum, even though we've got this, historic majority coming. This doesn't feel like, the moment Blair was elected, or, in America there was that sort of real fever around the time when Obama got in. There's none of that sort of excitement around the election. Yeah. It's much more a despair. People are voting against something rather than for something. So there's sort of a desperation. There's a sense of we have to get rid of something rather than embracing the change.
The Conservative campaign led by Rishi Sunak has been described anywhere between the worst ever seen and an intentional disaster, the likes of which only the producers could have given us. What's going on? Does anybody have a sense of this? Because when the commentary is you're trying to lose, strategically, I think that there leaves a little bit to be desired.
I mean, it's a car crash. It's a car crash. On the day he called the election, nobody thought he had a chance of winning. That was a given. Somehow, the polls show that his popularity has plummeted since he called the election. I mean, imagine how bad your campaign has to be if it's, you're not just sort of holding equal. He would have hoped to have had a little bounce, maybe people seeing him out and about might have led to, a 2% swing or something. His popularity has plummeted further just while he's going around the country. And that's partly because he has made so many unforced errors. So the biggest one I found, I've been going out and about speaking to, in particular, like what we call the blue wall, these are the seats that have been traditionally Conservative for many years. A lot of the people I met in these places, this is sort of the shires. This is sort of the beautiful green counties around London where people retire to after they've made a fortune in the city. This is where people, their kids go to pony club. It's a lovely part of the country, but very traditionally Conservative. As you walk around there now, people are so disillusioned, and there's so much anger over years of mismanagement, lots of reasons why they won't be voting Conservative. But one of the ones that really was the final straw was D-Day. So
wow. Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, it's something that is, speaks to the core of the British character, something everybody has grown up watching war movies. There's a real pride. For him, for Rishi Sunak, given that this is an opportunity to be seen standing next to world leaders, looking very prime ministerial, there's Macron, there's Biden, and also speaking to the nation, representing what, a lot of people see as sort of, the best of what we can be, to walk away. He met the veterans and then left early in order to do a campaign interview. That went down abysmally. I mean, I think it's probably lost him a lot more, a lot of seats that it might not have been lost otherwise. So, for example, one of the seats a lot of people here are watching is the one Penny Mordaunt has. She was one of the people that will be in the running for the leadership after Rishi Sunak. But she comes from a very traditional naval constituency. It's very where the Navy is based. I don't think she's going to win after the D-Day fiasco. There is such anger against the Conservatives for being basically very fundamentally unconservative. That was seen as sort of the worst thing they could have done. And that's in middle of the election. That's not anything to do with, years of bad governance or, his predecessors. This is entirely him. And it's entirely down to how he chose to do the campaign. And you just think that's bad politics.
Yeah, because I guess you can be boring and you can be fiscally conservative, obviously, which I would assume those kinds of areas are. But you need to be serious, and that was a element of unseriousness that you would do a frivolous interview when you should be there to memorialize what obviously means the world to Europe and specifically Britain's involvement in that war. Yeah, all right. So let me just do a little bit of devil's advocacy here.
Go for it.
While obviously that is not great, right? That would be, even here on our side of the Atlantic, it looks bad. But this is something that he was marked for long ago. If you even just understand how long the Conservatives have been in power, let alone the chaotic revolving door of leadership over the last 5 years, this is probably due no matter what. Even if he was running a bang up 11 out of 10 campaign, he was probably going to lose this race, right?
Totally. I mean, so these unforced errors just make it a lot worse, but he was always going to lose this election. And that's partly because the Conservatives have been in power now for 14 years. Yeah. It's very hard to get to the end of 14 years and not be hated by most people. They've also they've had lots of fiascos during that time, the handling of COVID, and that sense of, there's this real sense of betrayal here because, there were very strict rules. People were arrested if they were caught breaking them. And then it turned out that Boris Johnson had been hosting parties at Downing Street. That still comes up when I sort of speak to people going around the country. There's still such visceral anger over it because people had to miss the funerals of their grandmothers, and then that hasn't gone away. So Boris Johnson is a massive problem for Rishi Sunak. Liz Truss is even worse. So Liz Truss, in her very brief tenure in number 10, she was famously outlasted by a lettuce.
A live-streamed head of lettuce, for which she doesn't have a sense of humor about. That's my biggest thing with Liz Truss.
I agree.
Like, just start selling plush lettuces, and you're now lettuce Truss. Like, just go with it.
One of our finest moments.
Yeah,
the whole country was watching live a lettuce wilt. It was amazing. But she is still a factor that people talk about wherever you go in the country as a reason why they will not be voting Conservative. There is such anger. In the short time she was there, she managed to do so much damage. People's interest rates, their mortgages have gone up so much. They're still feeling it on a monthly basis, when they feel poorer at the end of the month. Fury over that. So you're right, there's very little Rishi Sunak could have done. I think he's also handicapped, though, by essentially who he is. So he's arrived at a time where there's been chaotic management of the economy. There's a cost of living crisis. Every single person in this country, you walk around, people are making choices to try and save money in a way that they weren't a year ago. Everyone is like maybe not buying a coffee. Everyone has felt the pinch. And at that moment, to have a man in charge who is a billionaire is difficult, I think. Yeah. And the other thing you hear a lot on the doorstep as you're walking, go around the campaign, is people saying he just doesn't understand our problems. He doesn't understand where we are. So because he hasn't been able to miraculously fix the economy, which I don't think anyone would have been, I think for them, they feel like it hasn't been urgent enough a problem for him because he's wealthy enough for it not to matter. And he's not always great at talking about that either. He looks awkward when he goes out and does normal things. He once did a campaign video at a petrol station, and it became very clear he'd never had to pay for petrol before and didn't quite know how. So it doesn't help that he's a deeply awkward man.
Conservatives are losing. That means somebody has to be winning, right? In this case, that's the Labour Party. But if the Conservatives have been in power for 14 years, that means that the Labour Party hasn't been. And much of that time coincided with the Labour Party's leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn is a controversial progressive figure that was never able to rally the Labour Party to a majority. He's been run out. Keir Starmer now leads the party. So what's changed? We asked founder, entrepreneur, CEO, and all-around swell guy, Will Harris. Now, you're a rich guy in London, which means you vote for Labour, but you were secretly relieved that Jeremy Corbyn didn't put you in a Labour camp, right?
That feels like a very loaded question, and one which you should probably ask Keir Starmer. So one of the great talking points over the last week of the campaign, and I don't want to date the coverage too much, but over the last few days, one of the big questions that Keir Starmer, the current leader of the Labour Party, has been asked is, if you were a candidate for the Labour Party in 2020, if you were backing Jeremy Corbyn in 2020, did you support him? And did you think he would be a great Prime Minister?
Yeah.
And on every occasion, Keir Starmer has said, well, I didn't think we would win. And that's sort of not really an answer, because what that really says is, well, it didn't really matter what Jeremy Corbyn thought, because Jeremy Corbyn was never going to win.
Yeah.
But what people on the left of the party, so, the very socialist Labour Party members, and people who, I would put it to you, Justin, are like me, a little bit more centrist. Let's not say rich in London. Let's say centrist.
Let's say centrist. That's more proper.
What we want to know is, did you really back Jeremy Corbyn? And the obvious answer, and I think the difference between perhaps American and English politics, is the obvious answer is, of course he didn't think Jeremy Corbyn was a fit and proper leader. And of course he didn't back it. But he wanted to win his seat, and he wanted to support his colleagues, and he thought that when Jeremy Corbyn absolutely lost like a turkey, he could be next in line to take it over.
Yeah.
And I think if we were in American politics, there'd be a much clearer answer to that question, which is, I support my party. I don't have to support my leaders to support my party.
Yes. Yeah. Which would be like what you see in our House of Representatives, is that not everybody loves the Speaker of the House. AOC doesn't have to love Nancy Pelosi, but she wants Nancy Pelosi or now...
the Florida pedophile doesn't have to like Mike Johnson.
Exactly. Sure. There we go.
But we can all admit to that. In English politics, it's just not quite proper to admit to that.
Well, because you guys actually put your House of Representatives in charge of everything, which I think is crazy.
Well, yeah, we can have that discussion. But the answer is, Keir Starmer is having the hardest yards of his campaign over the fact that he backed Jeremy Corbyn in 2020 and then, absolutely shot-putted him, yeeted him out of the party in 2022. Yes. And how do you reconcile those 2 points? And the answer is, I was being pragmatic. But nobody in British politics really wants... Ironically, given a population in the Brits that are pragmatic, nobody wants to accept the view that, he was in charge then, so I supported him, and as soon as I could, I yeeted him out.
Well, but yeah, that to me, it's been fascinating watching this election unfold from the Labour perspective, because from everything I've seen of Keir Starmer, this is about as friction-free a campaign as you could possibly run. It seems like he wakes up, finds an opportunity to see a microphone, says, conservatives, Jesus, and then goes to bed. Just in bed by 1 o'clock. That's all we need to say. If anybody else has any other questions, I'll be there tomorrow. And guess what? I'm going to say the Tories. Oh, my God. And then they'll move on. There's not a lot there except for the absolute reinforcement that I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. And if the only thing that he's facing right now is why did you support him back then, he's got his answer. Because I wanted to maintain standing in this party. I didn't think he was good. And I didn't think he was good because I did kick him out of the party. So that's fine for him. I don't know. I don't see that there's a downside.
Unfortunately, Justin, or fortunately, I think you should be a really highly paid consigliere to the Starmer campaign.
Let's go.
He just did that.
Call me, Keir.
He'd win.
Uh-huh.
But what he keeps on doing is doing public availabilities and sort of trying to be a man of the people and trying to, be out there and do
that does not seem like a strength for him.
Whereas
public
what he should
availabilities.
just do is sit at home and do nothing
Yeah.
for 4 weeks and then
Go
win
ship.
in a landslide.
Yeah.
But what he keeps on doing is going out, and then they get the question, Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer, and he sort of equivocates. And somebody there was in the UK, we have quite a famous TV show called Question Time.
Of course,
and Question Time is where members of the political elite are brought into a studio. There's a sort of vaguely attractive... I say that. It used to be David Dimbleby, so he wasn't very attractive at all. But now there is a vaguely attractive host who runs it.
Yeah.
And members of the public ask the question.
Yes.
And by the end of Keir Starmer's appearance, the members of the public said, well, I like what you have to say on policy, but because you won't answer this question on Jeremy Corbyn, I'm not sure I trust you any more than Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
And
but that's...
you know what? Keir Starmer, you should have just gotten out of bed, gone to the loo, and got back into bed.
Got back in the bed.
Better off.
Yeah, although this is eventually what's going to happen because he's not going to be able to hide once he's prime minister. And so he's going to face this kind of stuff. You'd almost rather him start to do it now. Although... I don't know. And let me ask you this. And you're somebody who's followed the polling and then results of these elections in the past a lot closer than I have. My priors on British polling is it's absolutely bug nuts and it never really pans out because it's a very, very hard mathematical thing to try to get a sense of a bunch of local elections that aren't really local elections, but they might be local elections depending on the candidates. But otherwise, it's a national election. It's a national referendum, but there are people that are involved, and that's it's very hard to get a sense of it. Right now, the polling has remained remarkably stubborn at the top, showing that Labour is going to not only take power, but possibly take power at greater than Blair level majorities. Do you believe it?
So I think the more interesting question about polling and probably about the results in general is, look, take it from the man who said Brexit was never going to happen in 2016.
Which you did.
Labour is running away with this.
Yes.
But it's not running away with it on the strength of the Keir Starmer campaign and the strength of the Labour campaign on the whole. It's running away with it because everybody is fed up with 12 years of the Conservatives.
Yes.
And, to go back to, a period you'll be familiar with, Obama was a historic president in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, whether the Democrats had selected Obama or Hillary as the candidate...
Yeah.
The Democrats were going to win, right?
They had it set up for him. Yeah.
Yeah. You could put I'm looking at the objects on my desk. You could put a pair of scissors up as the head of the Labour Party and the Labour Party would win the election right now. So the question is not, is the polling right? Because the polling is, generally right.
Directionally right, yeah.
Directionally right. And over here, we don't have quite the same problem that you guys have with, well, nobody answers the phone and polling is all screwed because young people don't answer the phone and how do you do online polling and that sort of thing. Because the sample sizes needed to make accurate polling over here are much lower. So you can make it work. The question is, who's going to come in second?
And that's before we get into who's going to come in second, let me ask one more question about Keir Starmer, because I do think that he has been, I joke that it's been frictionless and it's been better if he just takes a U-turn from the bed to the bathroom and then goes back to bed and watches the new season of Bridgerton. But the one thing that he has very much done is try to calm anybody in the center that he is definitely not a fiscal revolutionary. He has gone out of his way to say this is not, we're not going to spend our way out of our problems. There are going to be cuts. We're not going to raise taxes. Whether or not he holds to stuff like that, we'll see. But I do think that it is interesting that now the Labor Party, having gone through the woods post Blair and Gordon Brown, seem to have landed back in that centrist mold, right?
So I think you come down to the real sort of trope of British politics, which is a real contrast with American politics, in my view. Mm-hmm. Which is that in American politics, you do have a very strong left of center view and a very strong right of center view. And you wouldn't so much call them left of center and right of center as left and right.
Yeah.
And there, frankly, isn't a lot of center ground from the point of view of an outsider.
Yeah, sure.
In British politics, in truth, when it comes to policy, the Conservatives on the right and the Labour on the left are sort of just dodging in and out of the centre ground.
Yeah.
There is a very strong centrist history in this country. When Tony Blair won, it was because he was right-wing enough from the Labour Party to win a centrist majority.
Yeah.
When he handed the baton to Gordon Brown was considered too left. He handed the baton to David Cameron from the Conservatives, who frankly could have run a Labour policy campaign with exactly the same promises and done the same thing. Right. So in the UK, we are very much centrist with just some twinges of left and right. We don't have the same confrontational left and right politics that it seems sometimes like you guys have. And I think that sometimes that might come down to the fact that we have a genuine third, fourth, and fifth party in the UK. So we're not just splitting, 48 and 42% of the vote or whatever it is in, whatever given state. Mm-hmm. We genuinely have a slightly left of very centre party, a slightly left of very centre party, and then a left of centre party, a right of centre party, and a sort of across the boards party. And I think that does genuinely make a difference.
It's really interesting that in the Labour manifesto, one of the things that they committed to was wealth creation, which again can mean a number of different things. But I think when you can't get a doctor's appointment for your poorly child, I think wealth creation makes you think of the other end of the social spectrum, which didn't seem to be what Labour was created to stand for. So
yeah, I think that's them saying, "Don't worry, we're not going to intentionally nosedive the economy." That's them just saying, like, "Hey, we care about money, like just labor. We're aware money's a thing."
We know, we've heard of this thing you call money.
Yeah,
which was one of the lesser-known Beatles tracks. But that's the criticism labelled at Labour throughout the decades, rightly or wrongly, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly, is that they can't handle money and they don't know how to budget, and they make all these promises about we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to have all of these things. How are you going to pay for it? So, I suppose if you create enough wealth, then maybe
this is a lot easier to do.
So have you guys, has it made its way over the pond, the Rishi Peloton story?
I know that he is a Peloton guy, but I don't know anything specific about that. Go ahead.
So Rishi Sunak, our current Prime Minister, and this is just to get to the character point, right? About who is on the bench and what are they going to do. Because there is some fantasy that the Conservatives might lose this election and Rishi Sunak will continue as leader and try and lead them back to government.
Yeah.
Right? So in an interview on a sort of, daytime TV show, think sort of, the sort of Kelly Clarkson type, daytime.
Yeah, sort of softball.
Right. What do you do with your mornings, Prime Minister? And he says, well, I am on my Peloton at 6:30 every morning. I've got a Peloton bike and I've got a Peloton treadmill and I do one or the other and I, go for it. And you go, oh, okay, that's sort of relatable if you're the sort of person that can have both a Peloton bike and a Peloton treadmill. But
Exactly.
Sure,
Yeah.
let's leave that out. Somebody found his public Peloton profile.
Oh no. Which that's part of the community, the Peloton community, is that you do have these public things, and so they can see whether or not he is doing this every morning.
So it turns out he'd done it sort of 6 times in the last 3 months. And the last time that he'd done it, so he always said, I get up at 6:30, I get on my Peloton, I go for a run. He'd never done it at 6:30. The earliest he'd ever worked out is 9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
And before he gave this interview, and this is the, to your point about what is Rishi Sunak doing, the last Peloton workout that Rishi Sunak did before giving this softball Kelly Clarkson interview was after he walked out of 10 Downing Street and said, I'm going to call the general election for July the 4th.
Yeah, in the rain.
He walked back into 10 Downing Street, apparently got into his skivvies and jumped on the Peloton tread. And the workout he did was running into the Californian sunset.
Oh no, my God. My God.
You can't make it up. He's literally running off into the sunset.
Out of the rain, out of the cold, harsh London rain, into the golden hills of California.
And this plays into there is a theory, and it's not entirely debunkable. If I was going to be serious, which is that Rishi is, we bandy around terms like mental health crisis in serious terms. But if I was to take a more light-hearted term, there is a theory that Rishi is having a bit of a crisis, and he's decided, this is an absolute nightmare. I'm a multi-millionaire. My wife is a billionaire. What the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm a billionaire. Get me out of here.
Would you like to give Rishi Sunak just a little bit of a preview, a little welcome to Southern California, as he apparently is set to descend into, I think, Calabasas? I think he's going to move in next door with the with the Kardashians.
Yeah. So you're headed to a lovely area. I recommend Topanga Social. It's the new food court with lots of great options over there at Westfield when you want to, not have your personal chef cook for you. You just want to try something out. The Barnes and Noble that the Kardashians go to is right there. It's very nice. One of the last remaining busy Barnes and Nobles in the area. And of course, just on your way to Malibu, when you're headed up through Topanga Canyon, stop in Topanga. It's a nice little hippie town, and they've got some cool cafes.
We're going to have a lot more to say about one of the biggest names in this race that we have yet to really talk about. That's Nigel Farage. But before we do, let's talk about how you can support this program. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you go. Brings you to our Patreon page, and there you can support us for just a little bit of money. You can toss us a dollar, or if you want bonus content, and baby, is this the time to get bonus content if you want information on the presidential election, because things are moving, and they are moving very fast. On the Sunday shows, we had the full press rollout of Biden 2024. They brought out their big guns. They were on shows they're not normally on, and they were pressing the rabble-rousing public to please avert your eyes when it comes to any kind of Biden panic. We break down each and every one of them, and that is exclusive for our $3 club, our Patreon members. Folks, if you would buy me a cup of coffee each week, so I would sit down with you and just give you my opinions on politics, well, then you should be a $3 club member, because that's exactly what I do. Instead of two shows per week, you get 2 bonus. That's 4 shows each and every week. And at this time of year, Jam-packed. Thank you to everybody who has done that. Headed on over and become a $3 member. $10 tier gets you all that, plus your name read on the show, like these fine folks. Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Devon the CFP, Gloria, my mom, Gray Zone, Peapod, Jay, Sugar Brady, Marcus with a Q, DP4 Bongo, Sam, John, Niemeister, Edwin, and vote Gloria Young for King of the New World Order. Edison, Jeremy, a dog named Chucker, Sarah Jeannie, Matthew, Dr. G, Neil, his nerdiness Charles, Audrey Stoll Adler's Spot, Darren, Idris Erslanian, Bluefront and the Lenina, Berkeley, Stephen, Chad, Zombie Doc, Matt, Chill, Adam, Chief Andy, Robert, Casey, Paul, Dustin, Brad, D-Laser, Nick, Just Another Pilot, Middle Age Mike, Utah, Jimmy Montana, The Jen, Alo, D. Reilly, Craig, and Andrew. Thank you guys for doing this. Hopefully you enjoy this slightly different conversation that we are having. Obviously, it's in the midst of a lot of other news. And yeah, I'm just doing my best to bring it to you. So if you want to support us, that's the best way to do it. So we get it. Rishi's on the run. Keir has little to fear. So if this is, like Manveen said, just a boring campaign, well, we got to talk about someone. Enter Nigel Farage.
This looks like a job for me, so everybody just follow me, because we need a little controversy, because it feels so empty without me. I said, this looks like a job for me, so everybody just follow me, because we need a little controversy, because it feels so empty without me.
I don't think anyone looks at the map and thinks that it's favorable for the Conservatives in any way. And the number of things that could go wrong for Labor are less than the number of things that would need to go wrong for the Conservatives to pull an upset. Then you get Nigel Farage deciding to stride back onto the stage, pushing Sunak to be more populist, which, you know, that may be irrelevant, not a positive or a negative.
We are talking to an American audience here. Explain exactly what that means, who Nigel Farage is, and how he has reinserted himself into it.
Sure, yeah, and I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm going to be a little vague. But Nigel Farage was one of the UK Independence Party candidates. You might have heard it called UKIP. And he was pushing for Brexit very hard from the right of Boris Johnson. Yeah. He is often seen as
of David Cameron at the time, right? Like he was all the way back.
Well, Cameron was pro-Remain.
Yes.
Boris was a member of Parliament and pro-Leave. And then Farage was like, let's leave even
to the
harder.
Right.
Yeah,
yes, exactly. But he was a big voice. That was the first time that I remember hearing the name Nigel Farage, and I'm sure that it's probably similar to a lot of people listening. He was a warrior, a champion for Leave.
Extremely nationalist, extremely populist, extremely right wing. Those are all words you'll hear to describe him, and extremely out of politics for the last several years, until he rose again under the banner of the Reform Party, which not necessarily going to do much, if anything, in the election, but is enough of a voice and enough of a recognizable voice in UK politics to enter the conversation and be on stage for debates.
And that is the interesting part, is that, and if we get into timing, this is other stuff that I have read, that Nigel Farage may or may not have had some kind of role in the Trump campaign. He is certainly in the orbit of the Trump campaign. Mm-hmm. And part of the question of timing is that if this were an election held in November, after the American election, that he probably would not have been in a position to step back on stage. Because it's early, he's going to have a chance to do so. Now, that does mean he's going to serve in Parliament, but because it looks like he might win his seat. But it is interesting that now part of the conservative coalition is going to drift, to Farage's party. And I guess that's going to be part of their long, dark night of the soul, where the conservatives have to figure out, okay, well, what is our coalition going forward?
Yeah.
Because that certainly has been a problem since we were able to name 6 different prime ministers over the last 14 years.
For sure. Honestly, now that we've said all that out loud, it makes me think that the best reason for holding this election early is so that it doesn't get overshadowed by coverage of the U.S. election. And I don't say that just to be American centric, but people worldwide are
we are American exceptionalists on this program. So please go ahead.
But I say not just to, because people worldwide are very interested in what the U.S. election is going to be and how it's going to turn out. And it would be harder to get airtime the closer to the U.S. election it gets. And you're going to be colored by whatever's happening in the U.S. election more. You can stand out a little more if you do it now. So that could be enough right there. You are going to see a very different UK makeup once this is done, because they're gonna lose that northern wall that Boris Johnson built up for them. But I think the most fascinating thing about watching this is how little the polls have moved. Now, polls are polls, and anybody who's listened to this program knows that that is an ongoing conversation, right?
And let me say this, as somebody who follows American polls, UK polls are Looney Tunes. They don't make any sense. The people that you're polling before election season starts are often not representative of the people that are actually going to start tuning in and making decisions. And also, it doesn't American polls now.
Some of the polls, which are extraordinary, are showing Labour getting a lead of up to 500 seats, and yet nobody really wants to talk about Keir Starmer. Nigel Farage, if he's lucky, will get 2. And this is a man, people always forget this. They talk about him as some great political Svengali. This is a man who has stood for election 8 times and never won. He's failed to be a member of parliament in his entire life. And my God, he's tried. So, the idea that he's some whiz politician who just gets the people sometimes seems a little bit farcical. What he does do, though, in the way that, in a very Trump-like way. I was speaking to his biographer this morning, who sort of said he feels that he learned a lot from Trump, in that he's changed his style a bit to be a bit more like Trump. He has a bit more aggression and anger, but he comes and disrupts the entire political stage. That's what he does. From the moment he began his career, there was actually not very much anger about Europe. I interviewed a lot of the people around him. They called themselves the bad boys of Brexit after Brexit happened. And they were very proud of the fact that if you looked at the polls, people didn't care about Europe very much. It wasn't in their top 10 concerns. But they made it the thing. They brought it up to be the thing that drove the country to absolute despair. The entire country was split in a way that felt like you would never be able to bring it back together again. It's a bit Humpty Dumpty-like. And it's amazing because they did that entirely through, that extraordinary sort of campaigning, the feeding into people's fears, slightly cynical populism. And he, so for example, with the D-Day, this is a perfect example of how Nigel Farage works. On D-Day, he wasn't invited, but he turned up with his own personal photographer to be photographed looking very serious on the cliff face, sort of paying tribute.
Wow.
He was the first to jump in and say, "Why is Rishi Sunak leaving so soon?" But he did it in a way which made it a dog whistle. This is what he specializes in. So he sort of said he's a man who doesn't understand our values, which again sort of points at something which, I spoke to a Conservative MP the other day who said, look, there will be people in the country who feel uncomfortable having a person of colour being Prime Minister. There'll be Conservatives in the country who feel uncomfortable about, even though he's a Conservative Prime Minister. And when Nigel Farage says things like that, it just hits them in a way that, no amount of manifesto or policy talk is going to affect their impressions of who Rishi Sunak is. And yet, a lot of people were pointing out the irony is Nigel Farage famously spent his time at school goose-stepping around the courtyard. He was a Hitler fan. He used to do Hitler salutes. He was famously anti-Semitic to the other pupils. His teachers wrote in his reports that they were worried he was a neo-Nazi. He has since then courted friendships with the granddaughter of Hitler's finance minister, who is an AfD politician in Germany, who sort of is still so far to the right that she wants to shoot migrants rather than solving the crisis. You know, and he describes her as a close friend. A lot of people were pointing out that on D-Day, while he's standing there with his personal photographer, had it been the actual D-Day, nobody's quite sure which side he would have been on. He's not the greatest patriot.
Which values was he talking about?
Which values was he talking about? He probably would have been. A Lord Haw character. So one of the people who defected, basically.
Yeah.
So there's a core irony to Nigel Farage. He is the man who talks about being patriotic while often doing the opposite. He brought on Brexit, and there were lots of examples of how people around him benefited financially from shorting the pound, from basically betting against the country around that. He talks about being a man of the people, but spends his time smoking cigars in the most expensive restaurants in Belgravia. And would go to went to a very expensive public school here. So there's sort of there are lots of ironies about him, but he's managed to ride that populist wave, and it's at a time where, partly because of all the things we've talked about, people are so sick of the economic circumstances. They're so sick of governments not being able to provide answers that right across Europe we've seen the far right doing very well. In France they've triggered an election because Marine Le Pen was looking so successful. The AfD in Germany seems to be doing far better than it ever has. Italy has already voted for Meloni. So in a way, I think he feels it's his moment. Now, he's not going to win more than a few seats, but what he will do is get enough support in lots of constituencies to cost the Conservatives. He will lose them seats rather than winning them himself because of the first past the post system. And that's enough. That's enough damage to prove quite significant in this election. And the real question is what happens on the day after, July the 5th. There are lots of rumours that he will join up with the Conservative Party. He will have a leadership, he'll try and join the leadership race as soon as the election is over, and try and lead the Conservative Party much further to the right.
Let's get to that who's going to come in second and third, because the big news as the election has unfolded is the polling around whether or not Nigel Farage, who by rumors out here in the U.S. was set to join the Trump campaign if this election were held in the fall when everybody thought it was going to be. It gets held early. He's like, well, I don't know. I could just cancel my flight and totally throw a plugged-in toaster into the bathtub of this election. And now it appears, at least via some of these polls, that his Reform Party is running ahead of the Conservative Party, meaning that they might win more seats in Parliament than the Tories will. That seems outlierish and crazy to me. It feels like the kind of thing that everyone's going to forget about after July 4th because it didn't come true. Do you buy it?
So I'm going to slightly correct you there.
Okay.
Which is, nobody believes that the Reform Party will win more seats than the Conservative Party. But a lot of people believe they may win more of the popular vote.
The popular vote. Okay, that's what the polls are.
And because of the first pass of the post system that we have over here, it's perfectly conceivable that, if Reform take a certain percentage from Labour and a certain percentage from Conservatives, they could end up with a larger percentage of the popular vote, but still lose the seat because the largest party goes on to win.
Gotcha.
So just to say that nobody thinks that Reform is going to be a serious parliamentary force in its own standing in the next.
But they might have a mandate within the right of center bloc.
So they might well have a mandate within a right center bloc, because if it is indeed true that the Reform Party wins in the popular vote terms more than the Conservatives, and based on current polling as of today, it's not untenable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What you are effectively going to see is a hostile takeover of the Conservative Party by the Reform Party, not unlike the way you've seen the MAGA people in the States take over the Republican Party, which you would have said was, the Republic. If I'm going to characterize it as an outsider, you would have said the Republicans, they're sort of right of center, and they've got some beliefs, and you can, pick or choose them. But the MAGA extremists are pretty extreme, but they've got enough of a mandate that they can have enough of an influence such that they can, elect a speaker or not elect a speaker as it is. So Nigel Farage is on the record this week as saying he's not necessarily standing for the MP for the constituency that he's presented himself in. He believes he can be Prime Minister for the Conservatives in 2028.
So when this government would have to call, or would likely be calling, another election, he believes by that point Labour will be weak enough and his bloc will be strong enough that they could overtake and he could be Prime Minister.
It's a prime case of, if we combine forces on the dark side, we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
Sure.
And,
yeah.
And so sorry for the Star Wars nerds, but for Farage, he genuinely thinks that if he can get more of the popular vote than the Conservatives, then he will have a greater mandate to lead the right of centre government than anybody on the Conservative Party. And he might not be wrong. And there's an interesting stat that came out today about Farage, which is that Big Nige, as he is called, has more TikTok followers than Rishi Sunak, the Conservatives, Reform, and the Green combined. And that there is, in fact, and this gets to an interesting sort of parallel with your American politics.
Yeah.
There is, in fact, a huge Gen Z following for Farage.
Yeah.
Because they perceive every politician as being, a bit of a lying see you next Tuesday.
Yes.
And they're not impressed with what they say. But they perceive Farage as being, you know what, I like a beer, I like to go and watch the Euros, I like to smoke, his favourite pub in London is one of the only pubs in London that you can smoke indoors.
Gotcha. So he is an old man's a lad's lad.
He's a lad's lad. And if you were, there is a sort of trope in American politics that Trump is a poor man's view of what a rich person looks like.
Sure. Yeah.
And over here, there is a perception that Farage is a working classes version of what a
rich politician
looks like.
Yeah, yeah. But you would the kind of guy you could be friends with from that different class.
And what's interesting about the Reform Party and what they've done, they've put out their manifesto. So every country over here has to every
party. Yeah.
Every party in this country has to put out a manifesto saying, here are our priorities, here are our, what we intend to spend money on, here's how we cost it, etc. The Reform Party manifesto is absolutely out of the woods. It's insane. It's we're going to raise this much money through tax. Well, you're never going to do that. We're going to spend this much money on... You're never going to do that. But what young people connect with is the aspiration, because what they see in the two, centre-right and centre-left parties is realpolitik. It's here's what we think we can get done while sort of hanging on to power.
Yeah.
And for Gen Z, they're not interested in hanging on to power because they don't feel they have any power. They can't afford rent. They can't afford to buy a house. Their first jobs pay like rubbish. They're saying, blow it up.
Yeah.
And Farage is the only person in the campaign saying, you know what, screw this, blow it the hell up.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to who's going to come in second place in the overall campaign, just to wrap it back around, I think there's a solid chance that Nigel has enough of a personal touch and enough of a screw the system, blow it up mentality that a lot of young people vote for him. And that could be the difference between the average age of a Labour voter, which is between, I think I'm right in saying, sort of 24 and 42.
Yeah.
The average age of a Conservative voter, which is over 60 and only getting older. It might be, in fact, over 70 by now. Reform is the only party that's got
A youth
an
movement.
appeal across the whole age group.
Those are the players, the personalities. But what about the issues? Shockingly, this election is tracking pretty similar to the one that we're having in America right now. The economy and immigration are two of the top issues. But there is one element of this that is very UK specific. Public services, and most specifically, the NHS, the National Health Service.
You know, the NHS, as has been a constant for many years now, has been suffering. It's always teetering on the brink. COVID was a real sort of, moment where it was put under so much pressure. It hasn't completely bounced back. Waiting lists are huge. So, if you want to get a diagnosis or you want to get treatment, you're waiting months sometimes, which is crazy. And, especially when you know that every minute can count. So that there's real frustration around that. Nobody's really offering any great solutions. Everyone's always promising something will happen without explaining how. A lot of this is going to come down to the economic prospects for the future. Again, everyone is promising growth, but without explaining where it's going to come from. And we haven't had much growth for a while. We're finally starting to get inflation under, is starting to look a little bit better. There's a real frustration from a lot of people on the left and a lot of the younger generation who are voting for the first time, that Keir Starmer, given that he has this massive majority, could be much bolder. He could be much bolder in what he's promising. He could talk much more about how he would actually go about trying to get economic growth up. And actually, there's a real frustration about the fact that nobody is talking about Brexit. It's one of the things that has cost our economy more than others. There is a level of economic malaise, which I think is the same across Europe. It comes from a cost of living crisis. It comes from the war in Ukraine, fuel going up, all of those things that you'll know very well. We have an extra factor, which is Brexit. Brexit has cost a lot of companies in this country have had to cut their trade. They just can't afford to export anymore. Imports are so much more expensive. They take forever to arrive. People are feeling the difference. I've just been in France having to queue up, which is such a novelty for us. It's smallest things, but everything. You're feeling the friction now in a way that was only ever talked about before. It's really kicking in. And it's only going to get worse. Over the next 10 months or so, there are more measures coming which will make it even harder for people to trade. So at this point, I think people want to hear bolder solutions from somebody like Keir Starmer, that he should be able to say what he wants to do about Brexit. Will he renegotiate a deal? Will he try and reverse it? Will he try and rejoin, the customs union? Things that would help the economy. But he is adopting what we here are describing as a Ming vase strategy, which is basically victory is so close. If there's no point, he doesn't want to drop the ball.
Don't do anything. Don't breathe. Don't breathe.
Don't do anything.
Yeah.
He is literally carrying the Ming vase over the line and not breathing, not promising to do anything that, frankly, the Tories wouldn't be promising at the same time. So there's nothing very bold in any of the promises. And I think, in a way, that's partly why people aren't feeling very excited by this election.
If you look at the last 7 years, we've had something like 15 prime ministers. Obviously, I've exaggerated that slightly, but only slightly. So when Labour come in, I mean, there must be a part of politicians in the daily duties. As much as you want power and you crave power and you want power to exact change, there must be a part of you at certain parts of the process where you think it'd be better, like you say, to just duck out for a little while, let the other team come in, because this is not fixable. Certainly in the short term, the economy's wrecked. Public services in the UK are absolutely decimated. I mean, the trains are terrible. There's feces in the water. People were having to boil their kettles down in Cornwall because there was all these diseases in the tap water. Things like that are just, people don't forget them, and they're not easy to fix. There's been so much privatisation in the UK over the last 30, 40 years. So a lot of services are just not run very well and cost an incredible amount of money. And a lot of the profits then just get siphoned off to shareholders. And a lot of them are offshore anyway. So a lot of the money that we're paying, you know, I went to London yesterday and it cost me something like £160 to get there and back. And as I got on the train driver came on and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 8:15 from Liverpool to London. I've been on this train all day. Absolutely nothing works. So if you're going to get off, I'll do an announcement 5 minutes before." And that was it. And we all laughed because what else are you going to do? But if you're still voting Tory after that, then you need to give your head a wobble, as we say in Liverpool. So I mean, I've been really sort of reading up on the 97 election when Labour ousted the Tories then. And that for me, I mean, I was a lot younger, obviously. This
was the Tony Blair election.
Tony
right?
Blair, Gordon Brown, the Dream Ticket. They come in after, I think it was 17 years of the Tory party at that point. And it was a real exciting moment for the country. And it was exciting for me because I was young, but it was exciting for the whole country. And we had, you know, things changed very quickly. You know, we made lots of changes and some radical changes with the way the financial systems worked in the UK. And it really, over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, you saw a real improvement in public services. There was these Sure Start centres that opened for young people. And it did genuinely make certainly where I lived, there was this real kind of, you know, euphoria in the country for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if Labour can do that and just snap their fingers and do that, because I think there's a lot more broken. And I've almost got an idea. Are the Tories just sitting there going, we're not going to win. So what we need to do now is just make as many bad things worse as possible before Labour come in and, you know, just throwing fridges in the river and, you know, making things just as unpalatable as possible and as unfixable. Because personally, would you want to be going into power right now, having to make decisions in the state that the UK is in? Because I certainly wouldn't.
I mean, knowing nothing about the national mood in terms of stuff like how much of a public service sector that, like you mentioned, that's probably the one thing that, especially for a Labour government, that you're going to have to show improvement on within a year. Something's got to get fixed there. You have to have people saying, "Thank God this works. I'm happy about that," or else. What's the point of Labour if the public sector is not operating better than it was before? But that being said, I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? And, you know, in America, in general, elections don't turn on foreign policy because, you know, unless you're sending Americans to war, we generally don't care. Some people will care, but it's mostly people online and maybe virtue signaling with the Ukraine, you know, flag outside your house or something like that, or on your bumper. But for you guys, this is not a theoretical thing. Like, you know, when Ukraine being at war is in Europe, which is where you guys are, there's a lot. This is far closer to you, and you know, the idea of this continuing and NATO being more involved, the UK is a NATO country, like this is a lot more real. So the foreign policy thing is bad, and then who knows where the economy's going. I think the UK's had a pretty good track record on inflation, at least now. That's part of the reason why everybody assumes that Rishi just wanted to get the hell out of town, because they're like, wait, this could have been better. Like, you could have actually had more inflation reduction if you just waited until the fall to call this. So maybe that's the case, but I have no clue, you know, with all the public sector stuff. I do know that there's a lot of angst about it, but God, if I would know. I'm American. I have no idea how to fix a public service regime.
I mean, I can't fix anything. I can't. If I get a flat tire, I just phone the guy who comes with the truck and fixes it. I can't fix. But then I'm not a politician. I just always find it amazing that the most visual cues and the things that people can see with their own eyes and experience with their own lives are not the things that you seek to fix. Because if like, hand on heart, if people could afford the mortgage in this country, if people could afford one holiday a year, and if people could afford to pay the bills and not even have much left over, I think most people will be pretty satisfied with that. We're not asking for the world, but because Liz Truss comes in, wrecks the economy, mortgage rates, some people have had something like £400, £500, £600, £700 a month added onto their mortgage, which For most people,
Yeah.
you can't pay that. You can't afford it. You have to move house or make a change to your lifestyle, and that's stuff like that is that's the things that you should be really mindful of. And even things like, you've got all the kind of public services which are just crumbling in front of our eyes, and if you just improve them slightly, that will really, really, make things a lot more palatable for everyone. And I think the things in Europe, like the foreign policy, one of Rishi Sunak's manifesto points was that all 18-year-olds should now do mandatory national service.
I feel like we've gotten a good once over on this election. It's always fun to parachute into a topic that I have no actual expertise on at all and just ask dumb questions. But throughout all of it, it left me with this one difference between how they do things over there and how we do things over here. One more time, Tom Merritt. It's very interesting, the fatalism that comes about in British politics that does not exist in American politics, because we don't know where we're going to be as we get closer to November here. But let's imagine, for a thought experiment, that the Biden polls get worse, right? And it looks dim. The prospects of a Biden reelection are beginning to fade away from reasonable consciousness. I'll guarantee you this. In August, in Chicago, when the Democrats get up on a gigantic glittering stage with motion graphics and all sorts of stuff, everybody on stage will look dead into the camera and say, Joe Biden is the best choice for president, and we are going to win. We're going to shock the world. All the polls are wrong. Everything is actually in our favor. We will win re-election 4 more years, 4 more years, 4 more years. In British politics, not only in the media, but I've spoken to people who are actually involved in stuff off the record. It's just like, yeah, 14 years. We're going to get our ass kicked. It's going to be from the conservative side. Yeah, that's it. That's just what happens is we're just going to get thrown out. It's a matter of how bad we get thrown out. But that just is what it is. And I don't know whether or not it is a healthy understanding and trust in the polls that they believe this is just what's going to go. Maybe they have a better sense of just the metronomic tick-tock of how power comes and goes in a parliamentary system, or it's just that classic difference between a deep in-ground British fatalism and in contrast with the sparkling, if naive, American optimism.
Yeah, the stiff upper lip versus the cowboy optimism. I think there's something cultural to it. I think you're not wrong. I also think that in a parliamentary system that your tides are more predictable, right? Tides in Congress are somewhat more predictable than presidential. So in a winner-take-all presidential, a weird electoral system that the U.S. has, things are a little more unpredictable. That will be the more interesting part of this, because it will be very interesting if Labor doesn't win, doesn't sweep to a victory. So don't count that out as entirely impossible. But even the Conservative Party seems to agree that Labor is going to win.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for, some side bets, if you want to do place and show instead of just who's going to win, watch the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party. SNP has been very strong in Scotland, and the SNP is in favor of returning Scotland to Europe, which would, of course, mean having to leave the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And they have already had one referendum on Scottish independence that failed. And their First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, promised she was going to deliver another. And then she just sort of, with very little explanation, left the party.
Gotcha.
So you've now got John Swinney, who is the First Minister of the SNP, and it is Labour's best chance to sweep them off the board, too. If Labour sweeps them off the board, then that whole Scottish independence thing is just gone for a while. Anyway, it might come back later, but it'll be off the board for now. If the SNP holds on, that doesn't mean Scottish independence is back on the books, but at least it keeps it on simmer. And it would be a big victory for John Swinney to prove that he is the guy who should be leading the SNP, which a lot of people doubt. And I think he's probably going to lose, and then we're going to have a new first minister of the SNP.
All right, so keep an eye on the SNP. Is there anything else that is on your radar that I should put on my radar before I make a totally accurate prediction on the exact number of seats each party will get?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned Nigel Farage. That'll be entertaining because he's bombastic and nationalist and all of that. Never forget Ed Davey, because remember, the path for the Liberal Democrats.
Never forget Ed Davey.
The Liberal Democrats are the original Liberal Party, the descendant of the original Liberal Party. The Labour Party kind of cropped up to the left and took over their position. The Liberal Democrats, the path for the Liberal Democrats is spoil the election enough to go in coalition and become a deputy prime minister, and then you can go run political outreach for Facebook. So Ed Davey's on the path that Ed Miliband has blazed before him. Lib Dems are the wild card, though. Sometimes they're always expected to do like, 10% or whatever. And then sometimes they do like 1% and everybody declares them dead and then they don't die. Other times they overperform and they end up in coalition. So you just kind of never know. That's where the polls are usually very wrong, is with the Lib Dems. Because it's one of those things where I think people go into the voting booth and they're like, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to vote for the Lib Dem this time. He's sort of in the middle. And
that brings us to the end. As I speak to you right now, Sunday afternoon, June 30th, number one, England's still down against Slovakia in the Euros, but we have current aggregate polling by way of the BBC. Labour is at 40%. The Conservatives are at 20%. Reform has surged to an aggregate number of 16%. That projects to be around 434 Labour seats. That is well more than the 326 needed for a majority. And you guys know sometimes I like to make predictions, so let's go ahead and do one here. It's boring to call for a Labour victory, and it would be stupid to call for a Conservative victory. So we're going to stay away from that. Instead, we're going to make a prediction about that man of the hour, Big Nigel Farage. I'm going to say, based purely on vibes, that I believe that Reform polling numbers now aren't real. I think old habits die hard. No matter how much people are mad at the Conservative Party, it's just hard to hit that button that is contrary to how you've done it before. So I'm going to say that the Reform numbers are a Farage mirage, and Reform will be in single digits. I think Conservatives overperform their polls. I think the people are more mad when they're asked about it than they will be when they are in the voting booth. I think they will be at 25%. So Reform in single digits, Conservatives at 25%. That's my big prediction based on absolutely nothing. And that'll wrap it up for us today. Please, everybody, go find Sam Avery on Instagram, on Twitter, anywhere that you can find him. He is hilarious. If you are in the UK and he is coming by your town to do stand-up comedy, I would highly recommend it. Great dude, hilarious act. Please go seek him out. Tom Merritt, obviously, Daily Tech News Show. We're gang affiliated, me and Tom. Will Harris, always hilarious and amazing insight. I thank him for the time that he gave us on this program. And then, of course, Manveen Rana. If you are not listening to the story, I would highly recommend it. It is in the mold of the Daily from the New York Times, but obviously focused on UK and Eurocentric issues. But Manveen has done a lot of excellent work, I would say, over the last 6 months. She's had interviews with in-depth investigators on some of the origins of COVID. She's reported from Israel during this current conflict in Gaza. And obviously, they have been all over the election. So go ahead and download and subscribe to the story. That'll wrap it up for us today for our UK election special. Trust me, we're done with it for another 5 years. We won't even mention the United Kingdom. 5 years minimum. We're back. We got a lot on our plate here with the American election. This is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss all three. In it,